Deputy 10 minutes.
The European Financial Stability Facility was a measure designed not in the public interest, as is claimed in the title to the bill, but really fundamentally to salvage the European banks and major European speculators from the consequences of their reckless lending over the previous 10 years. As we know, they gambled wildly on property bubbles in Spain and in Ireland. Many of the European financial institutions were involved in the schemes that were built up around the United States subprime mortgage industry and accrued toxic debts to levels that are still unknown and to levels that I have no doubt are being carefully covered up in the current situation. Now, last July, in a panic response to a fear that Greece might be forced to default on its borrowings, the EU leaders concocted this further extension to the European Financial Stability Mechanism, in essence providing for the borrowing of masses of money in the financial markets, lend it to the peripheral countries in crisis, and then bleed dry the ordinary people of those countries to meet the payments demanded by the banks, by the hedge fund operators and by the various speculators. Now, surely it should be clear to this government, even to the backbenchers of this government, that this policy is a spectacular failure. 3 years of austerity in Greece and in Ireland have yielded a dismal failure with an enormously increased crisis. So all the austerity is doing, in other words, savaging the living standards and the services of the working class people, the vast majority in society, is to pile up further crisis. And austerity is a policy that is increasingly discredited. As the left pointed out from the beginning, when you cut in this manner the funds going into the pockets of that section of society who will spend virtually everything they get because it's low or middling income, then of course you cut drastically their ability to purchase goods and services, and therefore giving rise to this dreadful crisis that we have at the present time, which has resulted in tragic levels of unemployment. And if the Irish government would only listen to some of the voices that are increasingly being raised, not from the left only, but even right-wing commentators and analysts. The United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, for example, led by a former leader of the World Trade Organization, therefore hardly a left-winger, excoriates the policy of austerity that is being driven by the European Union and the European Central Bank at the present time, and counsels government that they should not take the advice of the very institutions, and they name rating agencies, whose prescriptions and actions got the world and Europe into this incredible crisis where it is at the present time. Even one pillar of the so-called Troika of the EU, ECB and the IMF that is driving austerity down the throats of the Irish people with the collaboration of the Irish government is in reality discrediting that policy. It seems to be schizophrenic. While insisting in Ireland and Greece that the mass of the population take savage cuts in their living standards, what did it warn yesterday? But that the United States and other major economies, read the European Union, warned them against fiscal tightening, afraid that it will cause further crisis on a world basis. And what is fiscal tightening except cutting the amount of funds that are going to the working people, to services, into capital investment and so forth. So we have now a body of opinion that is challenging the policy that is being driven by the EU ECB, that is capitulated to by the Irish government, and that is manifestly a dreadful failure. The Eurozone is in crisis. That is a crisis that will continue. It is almost inevitable by common consent that Greece will not be able to pay back these draconian debts. As Deputy Daly illustrated, the Greek working class and poor are being further impoverished, driven into an impossible position. But economic development has been shattered in Greece. Therefore, how can they generate the wealth to pay off these massive levels of debt? It is absolutely impossible. And default by Greece will result in a new banking crisis, which will have draconian effects on the European and even on the world economy. The problem is that within the Eurozone and the governments of the Eurozone and of the European Union, there is not the cohesion that is necessary to have a solution. And they will not have a solution on the basis of the crazed market system. And the national interests of the national capitalist establishments within the European Union are coming to the fore and will increasingly come to the fore as tension rises over the next period of time. And they will not agree on fundamental lines of argument that they hope might improve the situation. But while we are relying on the market system, where the private banks, hedge fund operators and so forth dictate policy, dictate interest rates, dictate in fact to entire economies, there is only further chaos and crisis in that situation. And therefore the deputies of the opposition that come in looking for an alternative, the alternative is clear. Capitalism and the financial market system is an utter chaotic failure. We therefore need revolutionary changes in the financial system. We need a socialist alternative. We need these major institutions to be brought into public ownership, under democratic control and accountability, and then directed to act for the common good, for major public investment, for example, in infrastructure, in services, etc., that would be capable then of recreating the crashed economies of the European periphery and indeed remaking the economies of many other countries in the EU that are suffering crisis to one degree or another. And we will see, I believe, increasing mobilisation of the working people of Europe, the pensioners and the poor and the youth, over the next short few years in opposition to a system that is drowning them in its crisis at the present time. If we had a trade union leadership in Europe or in this country that was worth anything, it certainly wouldn't have gone this far. But working people need to reclaim and take back their trade unions and use them as fighting organisations, and they will have no option but to do that over the next years, because otherwise the situation will go, unfortunately, from crisis to a worse crisis.